From wherever you are joining us today, thank you for joining and welcome to this Global Government Forum webinar titled AI for All, Addressing the Biases in Automation. My name is Richard Johnson and I'm the Executive Editor of Global Government Forum, which is a media and events company focused on bringing together public and civil servants from around the world to share best practice on pertinent policy issues. And this webinar is indeed on a very interesting topic that many governments are grappling with. Artificial intelligence has, in what feels like the space of only months to a layman like me, become ubiquitous in society and indeed government conversations, with tools like ChatGPT becoming or nestling in the headlines of news articles around the world. And we know from our conversations at Global Government Forum that artificial intelligence is something that governments around the world are exploring. They're looking at how AI can help reduce public sector bureaucracy and improve the delivery of services through automation. In recent weeks on Global Government Forum, for example, we've reported on how, just to give a few examples, the South Korean government had set out plans to use AI to improve services for citizens by automatically notifying individuals of their entitlement to welfare benefits. And we've spoken with Van Gautier of the Government of Canada's Artificial Intelligence Accelerator on how the agency is working to develop AI solutions in government. And we will hear, I'm sure, much more information about the opportunities for AI in government in this session today, and we have a great panel to have the discussion with. We've also been hearing increasingly about the risks of biases being embedded in AI decision-making that could perpetuate or indeed accentuate existing inequalities. Just last week, for example, we reported on the concerns from the European Union's Competition Commissioner, Marguerite Vestager, that artificial intelligence could harm underprivileged citizens. Her concerns are that people would be judged on their race or gender or place of residence, for example, by the AI. And she said, if a bank's using AI to decide if I can get a mortgage or not, or if it's providing social services in your municipality, you want to make sure that you're not being discriminated against because of your gender or your colour or your postcode, she said. And it's this concern, as well as that potential for AI that I alluded to at the start, that we want to look at in the webinar today. What are the risks and opportunities to using artificial intelligence in public services? And where can AI be best used in government? And where are the risks greatest? And what can governments do to maximise the inclusive and equitable use of AI? We've got a great panel to discuss this topic with today, as I said, and I will introduce them in a moment. But I also want to let everybody watching along know that we want to hear from you too. What are your questions about how government should use AI? Do you have concerns about biases being built into the system? And do you have thoughts on how this might be addressed? So as you listen to the opening presentations from our panelists that we'll get to momentarily, please do get in touch and share any questions or thoughts that you have using the Q&A function on Zoom. So to our panel. Firstly, we're joined by Jeremy Darrow, the Head of Artificial Intelligence at the Scottish Government. Jeremy is passionate about AI, particularly the potential it has to improve the lives of people in Scotland. And in his role, he is helping guide the country to become a leader in the development and use of trustworthy, ethical and inclusive AI. Jeremy's experience spans over 20 years across industry, academia and government, including aeronautics at MIT, computational biology at the University of Cambridge, and most recently, head of data innovation at the Scottish Government. So it's great to have Jeremy with us. Welcome, Jeremy. We're also joined by Judith Pertka, who is the head of the Observatory on Artificial Intelligence in Work and Society at the German Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs. The AI Observatory aims to build the evidence base on the impact of AI on work and society and shape the policy development and the regulatory framework in this area. The focus is on promoting the development and use of AI in a human-centred and responsible way. So it's another great perspective for today's webinar, and it's great to have you, Judith. Previously, Judith also worked as an economic advisor in the UK Civil Service, including advising the UK's Office for Artificial Intelligence. We're also joined by Ulises Moya Sanchez, the Director of Artificial Intelligence at the Jalisco State Government in Mexico. Ulises is the first director in this area in public administration in Germany, and he has worked on artificial intelligence projects that have been selected by the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence and Global UNESCO International Research Centre on Artificial Intelligence for their responsible and ethical design. In his career, he's also collaborated in deep learning research and applications at the Barcelona Supercomputing Centre at the High Performance Artificial Intelligence Group. So another great perspective. And last but by no means least, we're also joined by Laura Carter, who is the Senior Researcher in Public Sector Algorithms at the Ada Lovelace Institute. Laura is the program lead, for public sector use of data and algorithms, and a PhD candidate in human rights research methods at the University of Essex. At the Ada Lovelace Institute, Laura is currently working on the ethnography of data analytics in a UK local authority, which research is due to be published later this year, and we will hopefully hear some more about that shortly. So it's a great lineup for this discussion. And as I say, please do get in touch with any questions you have for our panelists, as we will have some time for questions once we've heard some opening comments from our panelists. And we'll start with Jeremy to provide those. Jeremy, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for the invitation to join the panel and for the kind introduction. I think this is a really vast and important topic, and it's really great to be here today and to have such a diverse range of perspectives on this panel. So I really look forward to our discussion, and as a result, I will keep my introductory remarks quite short. Like you were saying, Richard, I think that the wide availability of really easy to use AI tools like ChatGPT is really helping to make this issue urgent and concrete to a lot more people than ever before. And that includes government. So last week I spoke, for examples, with our education colleagues, our marketing team, and tomorrow I'm giving a presentation to social researchers. So all the way, across the organization and the wider public sector, there is really a sense of excitement, but also of worry. And I think, both feelings are justified to some extent. So the role of my central AI team in the Scottish Government is to help, translate this into an informed discussion and a coherent plan of action. So there's many aspects, of the issue of bias and fairness. It's an area of, very active technical research, starting with, what a useful definition of fairness is, trade-offs with privacy when collecting sensitive information so that you can measure and hopefully correct bias. So it's really vast, but before going into the details, and I know my fellow panelists have quite a lot of interesting examples to talk about, I think it's worth providing a little bit of context, because my view is that the technology is evolving really rapidly, but we face the same issues that we have always faced, and one of them being our personal prejudices and bias in our decision making. And these individual prejudices have become entrenched in society as a whole, and government in particular over millennia. So this is not new. What's new with AI is the risk of further entrenching those biases under a veneer of, logic or objectivity, and making it also a lot easier to discriminate on a large scale by automating decisions. So there is a risk, but I also think there's an opportunity there to better understand the biases that already exist by being able to look at the data in more detail, to understand more about decision making, and hopefully to address them. So I think AI is creating a crisis of ethics, but I think it's a good thing, because if you look at the state of the world today, the way we're doing things is continuing to fail billions of people. But anyway, this is not a philosophy panel, so I'm just going to bring this down to earth a little bit. how can we address bias in government decision-making and public services when it involves AI? First, I would say that principles are very important, and this is why we developed an AI strategy for Scotland, where we talk to our people, all our stakeholders, our entire ecosystem. We organize a debate in Parliament to have a really open discussion, and we agreed on a set of principles, and we published a strategy 2 years ago. So I think principles very important, but at the same time, we really need to provide practical tools to operationalize those principles, because a lot of organizations, particularly public sector organizations who might not be very mature from a digital and data point of view, they often don't really know where to start. In terms of tools, I'd say the first thing to do is, before creating new tools, is to make better use of existing ones. So for instance, in Scotland and the UK, we have tools called Equalities Impact Assessment that help teams go through potential, think through potential impact on equalities of, new tools, new services, new policies, and that's derived from our equality legislation. But unfortunately, sometimes these are used as a sort of tick box exercise because a lot of people don't really know how to use them well. So making better use of existing tools. And then I would say tailoring and expanding those to include AI specific aspects. And one example of this is called the Scottish AI Register, which we launched in the month of March. And the two main objectives of the register is, first, to provide public sector organizations with a structured process to consider those issues when developing or procuring AI system. And the second aspect is to make transparent this development of the use of AI in the public sector and offer the public a mechanism that is simple and effective to have a say in how AI is going to be used to make decisions and deliver public services to them. And I think that transparency and dialogue really is absolutely essential to addressing bias. Then what we're doing in my team is to help test those tools and help develop best practice in this area. So we're supporting individual teams, individual organizations on their AI journey, doing some pilots. We use a process called CIFTech, which enables us to work with very small innovative startups. And one of the projects we're doing at the moment is around using AI to improve accessibility to online public services, starting with disabled people. And you can read about this example on our AI register. The register has just been launched, so for now we just have a couple of examples, but we expect that number to greatly rise over the next few months. So yeah, please have a look later as well. And then I would say briefly, I think once we've developed the best practice in the public sector, we should also share it. And this is why we've created what's called the Scottish AI Playbook, which is going to be an open and practical guide to how we do AI in Scotland. And we launched that last year in beta version. At the moment, it's mainly a wiki, but the aim is to provide a one-stop source of information and best practice that everybody in the Scottish AI community can use and contribute to. And we are working with a number of partners, such as researchers, such as the Information Commissioner, health colleagues, to create sort of hubs as part of that playbook that delves into more detail of what AI means in different areas and what ethics means in that context, and issues of bias and so on. So I think that sharing of information is really important. Procurement is also really important. We're looking into how we could potentially incorporate some of the AI standards being developed around the world into our procurement processes, to start making sure that we hold to account those systems that most of the time we don't build but we procure. And I would say, again, maybe going back to my initial point about existing biases, I think we want to promote whole system thinking and explain to public sector colleagues that this is not just about AI, and that what our citizens ultimately care about is not whether AI was used to make a decision, but whether that decision was fair and was right for them. So just taking a broader view. But I think I'll just stop here to leave time for discussion. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. That's a really great opening contribution. Couple of points that really leapt out to me is that the thinking about the principles, but also thinking about how to operationalize those principles. That's something that I think a lot of public servants could appreciate, that tension, that the policies are often written, but it's embedding them that's the key thing. And also the transparency as well. But we've shared the link of the AI register. That's really impressive degree of transparency that you're aiming to undertake there, which again I think is going to be very important as the use of AI develops across the public sector. So that's a great opening contribution. Thank you very much, and we're now going to hear from Judith.
Yeah, good afternoon from Berlin, and also thank you very much for having me today on the panel. I'm also very much looking forward to the discussion and also learning from the other panelists. So thank you already for Jeremy, your insight into the Scottish AI system and ecosystem. Just a very brief disclaimer from me that today I will be expressing my personal views. So I'm looking forward to now share with you some insights on the German AI ecosystem, and I would like to do three things. I would like to present to you the German AI strategy and the role of the Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs is playing there. I would like to present the work of the Observatory on AI in Work and Society, and then highlight one of its projects that promotes the responsible and human-centered use of AI in the labour and social administration. So I don't know if Raquel, could you continue? Yeah, one more. Thank you very much. So the German AI strategy was launched way before the hype around ChatGPT, already in 2018, and it really spans across government. There's about 160 measures, but it is led by three departments, of which there is the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, there's the Federal Ministry for Education and Research, and the Federal Ministry for Labour and Social Affairs. And really, I'd like to point that out because it is quite unique in an international comparison that a Labour and Social Affairs Ministry leads an AI strategy. I truly think this is absolutely important because we now know that AI will impact the labour market hugely. And in fact, we estimate that by 2035, all jobs will be impacted by AI. And there's a lot of potential. There's the potential to increase labor productivity. There's the potential to combat skill shortages. There's also a lot of potential for people with disabilities to then easier access the labor market. But there's obviously also risks. There's the risk of discrimination and disinformation, and also that current inequalities in the labor market will be increased. So the Labour Ministry here, since 2018, has really put on the agenda very important topics like social dialogue, the further education, and also smart regulation in Germany. And one of the measures of the German AI strategy is, in effect, the establishment of an observatory on AI in work and society, which aims to do really two things. If we go to the next slide. So on the one hand, we try to analyze the impact of AI in work and society. And we do that on the one hand continuously by looking into the companies and into the administrations, what is actually happening there in real time when AI tools are applied and introduced. So, for example, what happens with labor productivity? How does that affect the workers' satisfaction? And what happens to health and safety? And we do that, for example, for the nerds among us with randomized control trials in German companies. We also look at, analyze the impacts in an international comparative way. So we fund one of the main programs of the Organization of Economic Development and Cooperation, the OECD. So it's the work program on AI in work, innovation, productivity, and skills. And all of these findings inform and shape the policymaking in Germany with regards to further education, social dialogue, but also regulation. But through the OECD program, we don't only inform German policymaking, but also the findings of the OECD AI WIPS program have been reported at G7 meetings, at G20 meetings, and one of our classification frameworks that was developed in the OECD program has been actually quoted by the US standardization agency. So that's the one part, so looking into what's actually happening, the analysis, and then on the other side, really promoting the responsible and human-centered use of AI in the public sector, in the private sector, but also in the third sector. And I would now like to highlight one of the projects that we're doing, which is we have set up a network on AI in the labor and public administration, which if you go to the next slide, exactly. So this is a network that was initiated by the Observatory and the Federal Ministry, but really it brings together 20 arm's length bodies that are in the labor and social administration in Germany. So you can see the logos here. I'm afraid all of them are in German, but just point out 2 or 3 of them to you. And there's, for example, the Federal Employment Agency, there is the German Federal Pension Insurance Association, or the Federal Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And why is this so important? So these associations or organizations, they're really big, and they process millions of applications and processes of German citizens every day. So there's a huge potential for the application of AI, for example, to make the services more citizen-friendly, but also to speed them up. And there's also, frankly, a problem with skill shortages in these organizations. So as well, AI can play a role here. On the other hand, the data that is processed here is very sensitive, because usually when people interact with the labor and social administration, it is at circumstances or difficult circumstances in their life, when they lose a job, or when they had an accident. So there is an increased responsibility to really process and apply AI in a human-centered and responsible way. So this is why this network has been set up even before there is AI regulation officially on the way. It is on the way with AI Act at the European level, but even before that, we wanted to make sure that we adhere to standards here. And so the network is coming together already for 2 years now, once a month, to exchange experiences with the implementation of AI tools, to get external speakers in to kind of together upskill. And they've also developed self-committing guidelines for the implementation and use of AI application and practice in these organizations, which kind of cover a value-based, a joint value-based, but also like very applicable checklists that can be used. At the moment, it's only available in German, but soon also in English. And to test these guidelines, we're now also funding AI projects in 3 of the organizations. And I would just briefly finish with telling you about the example of the AI project we're funding in the Accident Insurance Fund for the construction industry, or in German BG Bau. And they have actually identified that still on construction sites, every 3rd day a person is dying in Germany. And this is despite there being a lot of data and Excel sheets about these construction sites. But there's not enough members of staff to actually go to every single construction site and do an inspection. So now with this AI tool, they hope to create a propensity for where accidents are more likely to happen, and then to be able to visit these construction sites more targeted. And they hope with that tool, they can, on the one hand, reduce costs and compensation, but more importantly, save lives. So with that, I would like to conclude, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. That's really interesting, both the overall work of the observatory, watching how or observing how AI is being used in real time, which I think is invaluable in the current environment, but also that specific example at the end about the accident insurance fund. That sounds to me like a really clever and good use of AI to interrogate data that will lead to real insights, actionable insights that will stop people getting hurt in construction sites that perhaps just due to the volume of data wasn't possible before. So that's a really good perspective as well. We'll come next to Ulysses in Mexico for his opening comments.
Thank you. First, thank you for your kind invitation. Maybe we hear now some of the most important roles in the government, you know, make the regulation, which is very important, promote the artificial intelligence in the ecosystem. But now I want to present something different. This is more related with government-to-government solutions using artificial intelligence. I present a particular project. Maybe this is the most important project that we have. Maybe we spent more than 4 years in this project. And recently, this project has been ranked in the top 10 of projects by UNESCO. So we are very happy because of that. And let me show you this, the next one, please. Yes, first, Jalisco is closer to US. Maybe you know US. It's easy to find where is US, but we are in the West Coast, and we have about 8 million population, and we are well known because of these things, tequila, mariachi, and technology. The next one. About the technology, we have a very strong ecosystem, I mean, in Mexico related with artificial intelligence, because we have startups, big companies, we have computer power, research centers, partnerships, for instance, with IBD, with some Canadian institutes, related with the responsible artificial intelligence, and we have some participation and recognition because of our works related with responsible artificial intelligence by GPA and this UNESCO top 100. Yes. So, of course, we have universities, and we organize international events, and we have social communities participate in artificial intelligence. So, Jalisco is, just for general knowledge, is a kind of Silicon Valley of Mexico. So, next one. Okay, about this project, we have these points in order to understand what we do with that. So in Mexico and many countries, we have a problem with the diabetes, and this illness have other related problems. For instance, the diabetic retinopathy is a leading cause of vision loss around the world, and about 1 of 11 people needs an annual screening. If you make some numbers about the Jalisco population, about the diabetes rate, we have around 500,000 persons that needs this screening test for a year. And we only have around 50 physicians that could provide this test. So we need this physician in order to help these people, to cure these people. For this task, for the screening, we implement an artificial intelligence model in order to help to the physician to make this task. So we work in these models, in actually deep learning models, and this is a model that we call escalate to many people, around 2 million. And if we do that and we detect on time this illness, it's possible to reduce the vision loss. So the next one, please. Okay, how we do that? First, we create several models in order to make this screening test. This is the input of the model. This is an image, only an image. We don't know anything about the patient. We only need the image. And first, we detect some biases in the model because of the quality of the image. If we have bad quality, we have low performance. So this is important. This is a technical bias, but it's important to keep in mind these kind of problems of the model. It's not magic. They have a lot of problems with the low quality data. So then we create 3 models in order to classify the images and then send to the patient to the first level of health or the second level of health. We make this design. We believe that this is a robust design of the model because we implement several models in order to keep the details about what happened in every stage. And we publish around 7 scientific publications in international journals and conferences. And this is really important because it's difficult to find regulation specifically for artificial intelligence in Mexico, but we have the peer review, which is very important for the science and also in order to get the opinion for other experts. So this is something that we do in this project. And then we make a deployment in this site. We create a very nice, I like to match a serverless application in order to scale this application to millions of people. And then this is very important. We test these models on 1,000 local patients, but this is very important. We don't use any of these images for train the model. Was only used for testing. We train with public images and then testing with local images. Maybe you remember this model for COVID-19, something like that, and they train with the data and then test with the split of the data. And when they try to implement this in a hospital, of course, many of these models fails. So we try to care about these details because we try to implement this in the real world. We don't have a lab world. I mean, we need to put in the very bad condition in order to test them. And the metrics of this model are very good. It's very similar to a physician here in Mexico. The next one, please. Of course, this is not a solved problem. We have some problems right now. For instance, the artificial intelligence governance. We need to put together in a system, in a health system. So we need to work about how we could improve the results of the model, reduce the risk of the model, because some people think that we could detect any kind of illness with this model, but no, this is only training for diabetic retinopathy. So we have to be aware of that, of the users, of the physician, and all the system. Okay, we work with this project, and we only have these images so far. And we try to complete the full pipeline in order to get the data from the image and to the treatment. So we are working on that. We are worried about some possible, again, technical bias about the data drift. This is a very well-known problem of artificial intelligence models. And of course, now we have the data from the local patients. We have some meta data about this. First, the next one. And now we are evaluating some possible bias because of that. What happened with this? First, it's not usual to understand what is the bias when your input data is an image. So we have to take care about this because it is not usual. Even the ethical team here was very confused about how works this model, because they don't have some experience in deep learning models. But we find that there is a previous work that with the same kind of image could detect the age and the sex of the person only with the input image. This is strange because the humans, the physicians, the experts, they can't do this in the same way. They don't know how the system, the deep learning model could detect the age of or the sex, or even worse, they detect another thing like diabetes, if they smoke or not. These kind of problems could have in our models. Maybe our model could be affected by the sex of the patient. So we are working now, measure this possible bias in the model, but I have to say this is this was very difficult because at the beginning with the public data, we don't have any of these meta data. So we are working now with the local information that we have, and we are working with this possible bias of the models. I believe that we could have this in maybe 3-4 months, and we publish the results about how we measure this possible bias and the fairness. And that's all by my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What a great presentation and illustration of the uses that the AI can be put to, and the rigorous way that you're looking to address the biases, which we've discussed in throughout the session today as one of the potential drawbacks of AI. So thank you very much for that, Ulysses. And yes, once you have that paper ready for publication, please do share it, because we'd be very interested to share it very, very widely, I'm sure, and follow up on it with the audience. That's great. Thank you very much again. We're going to have one last opening presentation from Laura, and then we're going to get to the Q&A portion. So if you do have questions for us, please do remember to submit them using the Q&A button on Zoom. But before we get there, I'll ask Laura for her thoughts. Laura.
Thanks very much, Richard. So thank you very much to the Global Government Forum for inviting me to talk here today. It's been a real pleasure to hear from the other panelists, and I'm looking forward to everybody's questions. So my name's Laura Carter. I'm a senior researcher at the Ada Lovelace Institute. We're an independent research institute with a mission to ensure that data and AI work for people and society. We're based in London and Brussels. And I'm going to present today some findings from an ethnographic study which we did into the use of a data analytics system in a local authority in England. A local authority is one of the local government institutions. So this is local level, geographically bounded service provision. We did this research in 2020. We looked at a local authority that was using a data analytics system to bring together and to synthesize data from lots of different council systems. So lots of different service provision data systems, and also which aimed to predict potential risks and negative outcomes in some of the service provision domains, including in housing and children's social care. We're going to launch the report later this year. I'm hoping in July, but watch this space, to articulate the insights in a way that we think is useful and relevant in 2023. And I'm going to be talking today about the specific insights from our research, which are related to fairness, equalities, and discrimination. So Raquel, if you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So in the UK, we have a somewhat interesting legal framework in that we're both governed by the UK's implementation of the GDPR, but we also have a range of equalities legislation under which local authorities and other public sector institutions are often tasked with collecting data around protected characteristics under the UK's Equality Act 2010. And so we have a situation where information about things like an individual's age, their religion, whether or not they have a disability, whether or not they have the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, are both considered special category data, as in data that requires a higher level of protection under the UK GDPR, but is also relevant protected characteristics data, which is often collected voluntarily to monitor compliance with the Equality Act. And what we found in our research is that these two sets of legislation, they aren't in conflict, but it is difficult for local authorities to demonstrate compliance with both at the same time. And so this is often because, for example, data protection is handled by the data protection team, equalities monitoring is handled by the equalities team. They may not both be involved in developing the same systems, and they may not be both providing the same information for compliance purposes. And so what we're seeing is when local councils are trying to comply with both of these sets of regulation, we're seeing piecemeal documentation that may not particularly meet either of the needs. And so what we hope to see in the UK is for two of the regulators, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is the equalities regulator, and the Information Commissioner's Office, which handles data protection. We'd love to see these two regulators work together to provide guidance for local authorities and other public sector organisations to handle how they are using or excluding special category data, both in the use of data analytics systems, so when this data is being collected to feed into, for example, a predictive analytics system, and also to do equalities monitoring of these systems, as well as equalities monitoring of other services. And this links back to what Jeremy was saying about the situation in Scotland. We'd love to see a firm recommendation that equalities impact assessments are always carried out for the development and deployment of data analytics system. We know that we know that in England these are done sometimes, but they're not compulsory. If you move to the next slide, Raquel, thank you. We also found from talking to frontline workers who were using these data analytics systems that if the rationale for how outputs are generated was not clear, it was difficult for frontline service providers, social workers, housing officers to rely on or trust the outputs with which they were being provided. It was very difficult for frontline workers to use these algorithmic impacts in their day-to-day work. And so we found that where data outputs, algorithmic outputs, were explainable or understandable, this could be beneficial to frontline work, to service delivery. But if these systems were not explainable, or not explainable in a way that's accessible to everybody involved in the system, not just the technical or insight staff, not just management, but also to social workers, service providers, and the people who are seeking, the residents of this particular local authority who are seeking services. That we're recommending that data analytics systems should be explainable in a way that's accessible to everybody. And we're also recommending that local authorities should complete an algorithmic transparency report and upload it to the repository that's overseen by the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation and the Central Data and Digital Office. And there's some overlap here, I think, with what Jeremy was saying around the Scottish AI Register as well, that there's a real need for transparency about government use of these systems. And the final finding that I'm going to talk about, if you go to the next slide, Raquel, is around, and I think this has previously come up as well, around the need for stronger procurement guidance and how to develop success criteria for the use of data and data analytics systems, algorithmic systems. We found that when implementing what can be quite new technology or new uses for data, failing to set success criteria in advance can make it very difficult to measure impact, measure how much these data analytics systems are improving services, how much they're making the lives of social workers and other frontline workers easier, how much they're improving outcomes for residents. We also found that for a lot of local authorities who were keen to take advantage of the benefits that data analytics can offer, there's not a lot of guidance for them on how to procure systems developed by private companies or other third parties on how to make sure that they're procuring systems that work. And so we'd love to see the Crown Commercial Service, which is the government department that manages procurement for public sector organisations, to develop things like model contract clauses and perhaps a model for an algorithmic impact assessment standard to help local authorities and other public sector organisations to procure and implement and deploy data analytics systems in a way that works for their services and works for their residents. I will wrap up there. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's questions.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. That's fascinating research that is that you've been conducting, and again, once that is available, please do share it with me, and I'll make sure that it's shared to the audience who is watching along with us today as well, because it's a fantastic insight again into how this is all being considered and dealt with and implemented on the ground. Perhaps I will use that last point of Laura's as a jumping off point for the first question in the discussion, when you were making the point, Laura, about procuring systems that work and the kind of idea of algorithmic impact assessment standards. If I can broaden that out a little and perhaps go to Jeremy in the first instance with this, how engaged are the developers of AI, the companies and the kind of people who are involved in this outside the public sector in these kind of questions, and trying to make sure that the systems that are developed and that ended up being used by the public sector can be explained and can be shown to be equitable when they when the rubber hits the road, as it were. Is that something that those conversations are kind of actively happening? I'll ask Jeremy first, and then I'll go around the panel.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the answer is there's a huge amount of variation. I mean, obviously, as part of, for instance, developing our register, we've been working on companies who specialized in those aspects of AI, which has been tremendously helpful. But that will depend on the size, the sector, the corporate culture of various organizations. What I found really encouraging is we've been working with smaller AI companies on some exciting projects where, as we work through the development of the system, we've really been able to work together on those issues and for them to understand the importance of them. I think the key is to have this dialogue and make all businesses understand, the role that these have in terms of risk control, including future regulatory risk, and actually that doing AI right and being on the front foot on those issues is the way to develop a competitive advantage in the future as well. But of course, in order to get there, first you need to be able to reach out on the adoption side as well, and that's where the challenge is, because very often the problem is a lot of companies just don't have the capacity yet to be an informed customer, and that makes it harder to be able to look into those issues when they work with suppliers. So just to echo what Laura was saying, I think having sort of clauses, standards as part of procurement is a good way to raise the profile of those issues for companies.
And Judith, from the point of view of the observatory, do you have the line of sight that you need, or the insight that you would like from the kind of the providers of these AI technologies, excuse me, to understand the full range of impacts?
Thank you for the question. I think it is a really important one, and I think AI procurement is a really important and huge topic for public services that needs to be looked at much further and much more. I think about, through procurement, governments can also have a really important impact on the market, I think, as one huge buyer of potential AI technologies. Standards can be set by, adhering to certain procurement standards, and therefore pushing some ethical standards also into the market. So I think this is a really important mechanism also to not just like demand developers and companies what ethical questions they can answer, but it's also a way of actually making them find these answers for government if that's the standard that is set. So I think that is a really important vehicle to ensure that AI companies and developers are also looking more at ethical questions. In one example of a very of a company, or like how also foundation models or generative AI models. There is, for example, now a push in Germany also to use or to explore how generative AI can be used in public services, because there are, again, huge potential to increase labor productivity. And there is, for example, a German company that develops foundation models, and their emphasis is on actually transparency and explainability of the model. So when you put in a question, for example, in the conversation field, it will come back with an answer, but it will also tell you where that answer is from, so the source and how it's kind of been put together. So there are already some kind of attempts to make AI models more explainable, and I think by kind of procuring these type of models, governments can also have a real impact on pushing towards ethical standards.
Great, thank you. Ulysses, do you have any thoughts on that issue around how the need for private sector providers of this technology to be part of the sort of transparency drive?
Yeah, sure. There is a few challenges in this, because the private sector usually don't have access to the data. So how they will train the models? So first, if we want a good model testing these models in the public sector, they have to have access to this data. They have to label in and make this process very well. And this challenge is difficult because the data of that we have in the government actually is from the citizens most of the time. So they have to give access to these companies in order to provide these services. So there will be a problem. We try to work with this. Usually, if we publish all the data that we have, and then we say to the company, okay, we have this problem, but the data is public, and if you could do it, go ahead. If not, there is another company that they could working on that. In my experience, we have a lot of companies that they promising something that they don't have, or they have very bad ethical principles, but only in a few times. And that's why my job is important, in order to tell to my boss, to the government, to say, okay, this is not a good choice. this is maybe a fake solution. For instance, there is one company that offer us detect some criminal only by the face. Do you imagine that? This is ridiculous. This is okay. I have to stay in this meeting because of respect of the other people, but we say, okay, this is not possible. We could have this technology here. This is a fake for sure. So this is my comments. We work a lot with this company in order to promote, for instance, the infrastructure. We don't have a lot of GPUs here in Mexico, so we try to have this infrastructure here to train this big model. So there's a lot of ways to collaborate with private companies, but also, as I said, some challenges, in particular to the public sector.
Great, thank you very much. I did ask that question jumping off the back of your presentation, Laura, so I might open the next question up to you unless you want to add anything on what's just been discussed, which is from Hassan Ait Lechin, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name poorly, Hassan, who asked, how can governments ensure that AI systems are transparent and accountable to the public? Obviously, that's something that you're working on a lot. Is it something you think we're making progress on? Let's put it that way in terms of the transparency.
I mean, I think that's a really good question. So thanks, Hassan, for asking it. I mean, I think, are we making progress on it? I mean, it's a very new area, I think, for a lot of government entities, whether they're local government, central government, or working at an international level. We're certainly seeing movements towards transparency. So Jeremy spoke about the Scottish AI Register. There is an algorithm, the CDI, CPBO algorithmic transparency reporting standard. And I know at least there's several other jurisdictions around the world who've started to implement similar sort of registers or transparency measures. Is it meeting the sort of, is it transparency to an extent that we're able to hold these systems accountable? I think there's still probably quite a lot of work to do before we get to that stage. Yes, what we'd like to see is a lot more transparency, both from governments that are deploying these systems, but also, I think this is related to what Ulysses was saying in response to the previous question. A lot of these systems are being developed by private companies, and for governments to implement regulation or guidelines to encourage these private companies to also be transparent about the systems, about how they work. We're still seeing in the ethnographic research that we carried out at the Ada Lovelace Institute, we saw quite a lot of training provided by the private company who developed the system. We saw quite a lot of collaboration between them and the staff, but still there was a sense that it was very difficult to understand how the algorithmic system worked. I think it's good that a lot of people are starting to push for this, but I think there is still quite a way to go before we're able to understand a lot of the systems that are being deployed.
Great, thank you. I want to let Jeremy answer that question as well before I move on to the next one, but if anybody else in the panel wants to come in on that, do raise your hand after Jeremy's spoken.
Yes, I mean, I think Laura covered quite a lot of that, and I suppose I've already talked a little bit about the register. I think what's important to remember as well is that in order to have an informed conversation, you need to provide information ahead of time as well. So one of the things we've done is we've developed an online course, free online course called Living with AI, which actually we're starting, I think, the testing today, which is aimed at the general public and to help equip people so that they're able to have that productive dialogue with the public sector using, the register and so on. And we also have in place various engagement programs and trying particularly to reach out to the people that usually you don't hear from, because usually these are the people that you should really hear from, because they will be the most affected by AI. So it's not just a matter of putting a bunch of information on a website. I think you really need to put in the effort to provide more information to the public and really to go out there and talk to them, because it is our duty as government to do that. Because if you're in the private sector, if you make bad products, people won't buy your services, and that's the punishment you get. But people don't have a choice when it comes to interacting with us for their taxes, for their benefits, for a lot of important things in their lives. So we have this responsibility to set the bar. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks,
Maybe,
Jeremy.
maybe
Sorry, Judith.
Yeah, maybe if I can just add to that point of AI competencies being really important for everyone, really, to also being able to being able to critically reflect what is happening and asking the right questions. So I think that is really crucial also for governments to support the broad development of AI competencies. And what we're, for example, doing now with the the Observatory on AI and Work and Society is also launching a kind of a massive AI competency project, where we will be having over 200 events over the next couple of months in companies, but mainly SME companies, to inform and critically reflect with employees, but also their workers' representations about AI, and do that also in a very illustrative way, with kind of demonstrators that I can interact with, or exoskeletons, or kind of VR glasses, to kind of really understand what is happening in the world of work and working with AI. So I think that is a really important point, and also not just for like the general public or the workers and their representations, but also really for civil society. It's really important that they also develop their AI skills and the competencies to develop AI for the public good. So I'd just like to mention another project that we are funding in the Federal Ministry out of the German AI strategy, which is called the Civic Coding project, which is essentially two parts. So one part is like a Tinder for kind of public service, or any really third sector organization that would like to has a need for an AI tool or a use case to come together with developers, and so they have like kind of a Tinder where they can swipe and find the right partners, and then come together as a group and then develop projects. And to provide seed funding for them, we have different rounds of a kind of competition where they can apply for seed funding. We just announced the winners of the third round. And soon we will also have another funding round where not just seed funding will be provided, but funding along the value chain. And some projects that have developed are really impressive, like supporting, for example, to translate the kind of public service language into easier understandable language, or helping people with impairment to navigate easier in the public space. So it's a really important aspect of it as well, I think, to raise. Also coming back to transparency, race AI competency is a really important point.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Judith. Absolutely. We've had a question in from David Brown. I'll put to Ulysses in the first instance. I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on the statement, says David Brown. AI is probably much less biased than the average human being. I don't know, Ulysses, if you'd agree with that. I'm putting it to you because you mentioned that the performance of the AI tool that you were using to detect diabetes was as good as the kind of human doctors. Do you think you have any reflections on whether the biases are different or replicated, or indeed less biased?
Okay. This is maybe a bit a tough question, because this model have for input the data. So if we have a bias in the data, or in the labeling, or in in this process, we could have bias in the model for sure. This is not an option. So some people doesn't care about this. They only say, okay, I have my code, they have the data, this is working, they could detect this. But then when they deploy the models, they have usual problems, as I say, the data drift, because, for instance, they didn't see a different color scheme, for instance. And this is a well-known problem, at least in deep learning. So if they take care for the data, for the representation of the data, maybe they could have less bias than a human. But this model have also other technical problems. For instance, it's possible to, if the input is an image, you could attack this image. You could have add some kind of poison in the image, and for us it's impossible, maybe impossible to see how we attack the model, and then we have another label, another output for the model. So I still believe in in the human side. I believe the human could have less bias than the model, because the models right now are very easy to fool. So that's my comment about that.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on David's slightly provocative phrasing? But I think it's a reasonable discussion to have. Laura, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question, and it's certainly something that we've seen discussed in a lot of the media around, particularly with the rapid development of things like large language models. I suppose the way I'd respond to that is to sort of go, well, there are a lot of AIs and there are a lot of people, sort of as the example that Ulysses was saying, your AI model might be better at detecting diabetic retinopathy than the average person, but that doesn't mean that it's better than an expert ophthalmologist, for example. And it's certainly, even if you've got one that works for diabetic retinopathy, as Ulysses said, that doesn't mean it works for any other condition as well. And so I think it's important to not lose sight of the fact that what we really want is systems that work for everybody, and for AIs to potentially be deployed as part of those systems, but in a way that produces good outcomes for the people who are seeking healthcare for their eyes, or people who are seeking access to services or welfare benefits. The question of bias is an interesting one. It frames things in a very statistical way. And it's important to think about bias in data systems, but as well as that, to think about discrimination in social services or local government more broadly. And what we're seeking is a system that works for everybody.
Thank you, Laura. We're coming very close to time. So I was going to ask one more question, but sorry, Judith, did you want to come in there? Apologies.
I just wanted to emphasize what Laura said, that it's really about the systems that have to work, but I still would like to hope that there is potential with AI systems to actually overcome this bias eventually. And just to also point out that to really tackle bias is also a technical problem, to kind of come to a value judgment as a society, what we consider as actable and just. That is, I think, also a different question, which is obviously maybe a bit more of a difficult one, and also a negotiation process. And I think it's great that through these AI technologies, now this comes actually to the forefront and we are having this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very, very good point, that we're now engaged in this kind of discussion. Perhaps we wouldn't have been previously. I will use Brandon Charles's question as a kind of closing question to the panel, and we'll go around in the same order that we did the opening presentations. So use this as a jumping off point for any final thoughts as well. Brandon asks, this is a kind of practical question, that's why I'm asking it. I'm quite keen to get this practical thought in before we close. Is anonymizing data sufficient for feeding public sector data into AI APIs, such as OpenAI, or are there other privacy concerns. That's quite a practical question, I think, in terms of how can the public sector use its data in things like OpenAI. What should the approach be? So I'll put that to Jeremy first, and then I'll go around the panel. But if there's any other closing thoughts as well, this is the moment for them.
Thank you. That is really an excellent question, and one which I'm being asked on a daily basis. I think that it's a little bit tricky. Very briefly, I mean, the first thing is that anonymization is a very complex thing. I used to work specifically on this when I was doing sort of research into data linkage across health and social care. That is a very non-trivial thing. So good anonymization is an issue, and then of course there are further issues in terms of you know, people starting inputting the strategies or future plans of government into those tools that then people might try and reverse engineer later on. And of course, there's the question as well of, you know, intellectual property, both in terms of what you put in and what you get out as well. You know, our marketing colleagues asked me if they could use a campaign that was sent to them by people said that they use, you know, they came up with a really cool concept for a communication concept, but actually it was coming, you know, it was generated with AI, so could they use that or not? So it's a really interesting question. I think it's going to take a while, and we're working across government to come up with good guidelines so that people can experiment safely. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Where do we stand on this issue in Germany, Judith, from your perspective?
Yeah, I guess ChatGPT and the kind of wide opening of that tool to the broad public has really sparked a debate of how to use some of these AI tools and what data can be, on how they can be used, and what the privacy issues are. We know that the Italian government, for example, first shut down ChatGPT in Italy because of privacy concerns, and now it's, I think, available again. And we're having similar discussions in Germany and many organizations. Should we use tools? What data can be given to these tools, and what shouldn't be? Obviously, there's like personal data that is really sensitive, but also like these tools can profile you and kind of learn from kind of just normal things, and that you're asking what you're thinking or what you're probably working on. Some of our organizations have now forbidden to use tools like that. Others just work with guidelines, and we're still, I think, in a process where we're kind of trying to work out what works best. But I think we need to, in general, try to harness the potential of AI, while at the same time making sure we kind of also deal with the risks, and there's kind of a sweet spot to find. And I think in Germany and in Europe, we are now especially looking at Brussels, where the tripartite dialogue has started, and we're looking forward to seeing what is happening in the next couple of months there, and then how we act, and then actually the work really starts on the ground to work out how we implement these issues. And there will be a lot of work, but also very exciting.
Yes, indeed, and that's something we're keeping a close eye on as well at Global Government Forum in terms of our editorial coverage. So yeah, keep an eye on GGF as well for updates from Brussels and beyond in terms of AI regulation. Ulysses, I'll come to you for any final reflections on that last question, or indeed broader.
Yeah, sure. The simple questions, I say no, is not enough to make this process. Because there is a very nice work from UT Austin, University of Texas, Austin, where they could get back some private information from the Netflix preference. Maybe it's a well-known paper. So usually to be sure of that, we make another technique that we add some noise to the data. This is something similar they call differential privacy. So this is why we try to make this more sure, but at the end, maybe some hacker could go back and get this data. So we try to make this more difficult. So this is one technique in order to do that. So just be careful with this. because they could have another data that they could complement with the public data and get new results that even you could never imagine, because you don't have access to all the data. So just be careful of that. And my final talks about this is I enjoyed be here. This is a great panel. I learned a lot from my partners here. So thank you again. Hope to see you.
Thank you very much, Ulysses. And yes, I think it's been a great panel. I'd be very keen to reconvene it. Just final thoughts, Laura, on that question about
I think just to echo
data.
What's already been said, genuine anonymization of data is very difficult, and it's often possible to re-identify data, as Ulysses said, after the fact. So I'd be very wary of anonymizing data before putting it into any of these proprietary APIs. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that are fun to play around with, but I think be very careful about what data you put into them.
Great, thank you very much. And that is where I'm going to have to bring today's session to a close. Thank you to all of our panel for joining us today, and for everyone for watching along. Apologies that I wasn't able to get to everybody's questions, but we had a great engagement there, and I think there's more than enough for us to revisit this topic in a future webinar. You'll be receiving a recording of this session in the next few days. If you want to revisit it, and the slides that were part of the presentations will also be available. I should have said that earlier, but just to let you know. There will also be a report on today's session in the next few weeks too. Before that though, there's a survey that should be dropping into your inbox very shortly to get your thoughts on today's webinar, and it would really help me and the team here at Global Government Forum to make sure that we're providing you with the best possible content if you were able to fill that in. And any ideas or topics that you would like us to cover in future webinars as well would also be welcome. We do run a wide range of webinars here at GGF, and the upcoming one that might be of interest to you is the Moral Haze: How Civil Servants can maintain legitimacy in an era of populism, which is on the 11th of July and is also on a very pertinent topic. So it'd be great if you could join us for that. So thanks once again to everybody for joining the webinar today, and we hope to see you at another one of our sessions very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. Thank you.